As we say on the tours in Israel, we love you, but we leave you. And the bus leaves on time. But we'll carry on for another 50-55 minutes or so, making progress. My plan is to leave the very last session. We'll be very focused, and we'll speak about the war in Gaza and what led to it. Of course, this is, of course, the most updated, or the thing that takes the whole world's agenda. And I have to say, when I try to zoom out, to try to understand why this level of obsession about what the state of Israel is doing, because it is an obsession. We speak about like a mental condition around the world. Many things happen around the world. The people are getting killed in larger numbers than in Gaza, and it just goes under the radar. Nobody seems to care. When it comes to the state of Israel, it's an hysteria. In the media, in the academia, I just read today something about the UN. They had 60 sessions since November 2023 to discuss starvation in Gaza, which is absolutely nonsense, and only 19 to discuss starvation in Sudan, which is a real thing. One meeting only to discuss Russia and the Ukraine. One meeting about Somalia. You know how many people died in Yemen over the last decade? United Nations figures, 82,000 children starved to death in Yemen, and about 400,000 others. When was anybody marching outside the embassies of the Houthis or Saudi Arabia? There's some real starvation over there. It's not rational. It's just impossible to explain that. It doesn't make any sense. I will dare to say that it will be the essence of anti-Semitism, basically, not just today. If you only care about casualties that the Jewish country is committing, so to speak, and you don't care about anything else, that's the definition of anti-Semite. You cannot measure the Jewish state using other criteria than you measure the rest of the world. That's the definition of anti-Semite. Just impossible to understand. Any idea how many curriculums around the Western universities are dedicated to the Middle East, Jewish colonialism, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, based on totally fake ideas? And I read some of them and said, where did you get those? The fact that you have a title of a PhD, you can be as idiot as anybody else if you have an agenda. And we do speak about that. I just do not understand this obsession. You're watching BBC and CNN. The world has lots of problems, but somehow everything speaks about Israel and about Gaza. Was anybody considering negotiating with ISIS? They're still there, by the way. No, ISIS has to be destroyed. You tell me how Hamas is different than ISIS. Same ideology, same MO, same everything. For some reason, people say, oh, no, these are Palestinians, they are different. No, they are very much the same. One reason, because we are on the other side of the fence. So when the Jews are involved, oh yes, they'll get our attention, we're going to criticize them, it doesn't make sense, at least not to me. But that's what we see. It is an obsession. It's not something you can explain rationally. I'm sorry about taking this side. Before I go back, I would like to encourage you also to check out the resources table outside. I think that you'll find a few things that you may be interested in. 4 books I'm offering. You have to be a student of the world to enjoy some of them, but also 4 sets of videos, 8 hours of a virtual tour. If you don't come to Israel, get the virtual tour. Some very nice drone footage of the country, guided by myself and my good friend Nir Nitzan. 8 hours of virtual tour about Jerusalem. And I have a whole set of 11 lectures on video about Give Us a King, the monarchy of Israel and Judah, etc. Not retelling the Bible, viewing everything by using documents from Babylon, Assyria, Egypt. If you enjoy that kind of material, go ahead. And I was told that when you deal with Americans, you have to offer the combo. So there was a combo as well. If you want to get everything, my wife will be there and very happy to assist you. Let's go back now to the reason why we are here. 1936, this big revolt begins. The Arabs made a fatal mistake. And since the Arabs are revolting against the British, guess what happens? France is very close to British territory. Syria, right, Lebanon? France is more than happy to send some of the people from Syria to fight against the British side by side with the Arabs in Palestine. So once again, we speak about armed militias infiltrating into British Mandate's territory, and in 3 years of a war, 5,000 Arabs are killed, most of them by Arabs. It turned to be a civil war. It's affecting the Jewish part as well. But in the midst of it, I'll skip this one, something happens because there may be a solution here. The Arabs are very upset. Britain was committed to create a state for the Jews. It's not working. Let's see if you can find a solution. I have to tell you over and over again, this is British diplomacy. The world is still pressurizing Britain. You got the mandate for one reason only. You are doing everything to destroy that purpose. You are committed. So we speak about British politics that tries to say, okay, it's not working. We are dedicating lots of resources. Maybe something can be done. During that war, the Jewish part is really blessed because Great Britain needs people to help them. They don't have enough forces. Keep in mind, the war is about to begin. Europe is getting crazy because of Nazi Germany. Great Britain's attention goes to Europe, not to Palestine. They need somebody to assist them. So right now, the Arabs are revolting. Who will assist you? The Jews. So they are the Jewish militia, the Haganah, which means defense basically. They equip them for the first time ever. Great Britain is willing to equip the Jewish militias with weapons. They equip the Arabs all the time because they guard the oil refineries, for example. They employ them as armed guards in places. Now, since the Arabs are revolting, we'll invest in the Jews. Real blessing. In the same time, the Jews are building new communities and more land is purchased. This event that will devastate the Arab agenda and the Arab militias was a blessing, at least for the Jewish side, in Palestine. For example, the main harbor was the harbor of Jaffa, and through the harbor of Jaffa, all the citrus, Jaffa oranges exported. Now it's not accessible for Jews anymore. So the Jews built a harbor in Tel Aviv. Right? That was another blessing. A lot of jobs are created, money's coming in. It looks like things are going to the right direction, especially because the Arabs are being really devastated by the British. It looks like things are taking a more kind of a normal turn. I'm going to run this one through with your permission, because part of the solution of the British was that maybe we need to find a solution here, and maybe it's not just a Jewish state, we need to consider an Arab state. Great Britain, and once again I apologize for all of these, Great Britain decides that they're going to try to find a solution by partitioning the land, one for the Jews, one for the Arabs, a violation of the mandatory document that Britain was committed to. That's British policy, and I apologize once again for all of that. The Assembly Commission, that will be called the Royal Commission, headed by one of the British Lords, Lord Peel, and the commission is coming over to Palestine, and they want to meet with Jewish leaders, with Arab leaders, and try to find some kind of a solution. They want to investigate what were the reasons for the Arab revolt, where the British government was wrong, as the British mandatory authorities are really executing the British diplomacy, or maybe the local governor has his own agenda. They understood that something is wrong here. So they send a committee to inquire, and this committee, after meeting with Jewish leaders, Arabs refused to report to that because the land is Arab, the Jews have no rights in it, we're not negotiating about anything. So this committee comes to the conclusion that the only way to try to solve the problem is by partitioning the land, and here we come to what will be called the partition plan. Palestine is in front of you, the mandatory borders, and that's how it's going to look like. This will be an Arab land, Arab territory. This will be the Jewish territory, based on the land that was purchased by the Jews. This will be international or British, basically. And that plan will have to lead the parties to negotiations. Everybody gets something. Maybe it will end the mandate, but maybe it will end it peacefully and not violently. Now, for the Jewish mindset, we said, just a minute, only 15 years ago, that was our land, all right? And then you took part of it by Churchill in 1922. Now, that's what you offer for a Jewish state? It's less than 7% of the original offer. Now, the Arab view was very much the same. This land is Arab, is Muslim, all of it. The Jews have zero rights in it. We don't care about the League of Nations. We don't care about the mandate. We are the majority. The Jews will get zero, absolutely nothing. That's the only way this can end. But for the first time, it's presented on the world's table now, a partition. The only way to accomplish that partition, I have to take a sidetrack. We speak about the mid-30s. We speak about the years after the First World War in every country in Europe. The solution to live peacefully was partition. You take the Austro-Hungarian Empire, you divide it. Partition to the Czechs and the Slovaks and the Bulgarians and the Romanians and the Serbs and the Croats. That was the mindset. Let's do the same in Palestine. We'll take the land, and the only way for people to live in peace, divide into two. One for the Jews, one for the Arabs. It was not a plan that was made specially for Palestine. It was tested before in many places around Europe, and it worked. Which means if you try to have two ethnicities in one country, you end up with a civil war. And that was proven over and over again. That was the mindset. The Jewish plan was, you know what? We'll get whatever you give us. And we go from there. The Arab answer was, no way, not going to work. But it's important what was the conclusion of Lord Peel himself. And I highlighted that here. Number one, you see that the Jewish National Home is no longer an experiment. It will happen. There are people, establishments, institutions, they are ready for statehood. That's what the mandate was all about. And then, he says, which is very important, they simply cannot exist together. One is very European, progressive, educated, other one is not. So Jews and Arabs will not live together in one land. Partition, therefore, is the only possible way to end this in peace. It wasn't working either way, but as long as the Peel Commission was in the country was quiet. The Arabs stopped all their revolt. They also wanted to find some favor in the eyes, but they refused to come to the table. They refused to come and give their plan. By the way, I have to say that over the existence of the State of Israel, Israel presented 7 peace plans vis-a-vis the Palestinians. 7. All turned down without a single counter suggestion. The Palestinians never had a plan on the table. How do they see the end of the conflict? Because they don't have such a plan. The end is one. The Jews are dead. No Jewish state. If that's how you see the future, you're going to lose. 7 times Israel presented peace plans. It was always turned down without a counter offer. It's just the way it is. And therefore, to be very optimistic about the future, sometimes it's not easy when you know the mindset of the other side. So that will be the first partition of the land, or the Peel Commission. That was the recommendation. All kind of details, not that important. For example, that Arab goods could be exported through the Haifa port and Jewish goods through the port of Eilat. So they tried to create some kind of a cooperation, even financially. The two people will be separated, but they will be united somehow. By the way, it also said that the Arab state should be part of Transjordan. It won't be completely independent. It will be a confederation of the Kingdom of Jordan plus the new state for the Palestinians. That was not working. So the British policy wasn't working here, but the Arabs understood. Whenever there's a problem, all we have to do is introduce violence, and Great Britain will succumb, will submit. That's the way to get things done. And since the war is around the corner, the Second World War, and since the British need the Arab support, they issue a paper of policy. It will be called the White Paper, simply because the cover was white. It was issued in the May 17th by Malcolm MacDonald, Colonial Secretary, and says very clearly, Balfour made a mistake. The Balfour Declaration was a mistake. Great Britain could not anticipate the rapid change in demographics. They created that. And therefore, there's no promise for the Jews anymore. Great Britain is not supporting a Jewish state anymore. There will be one state, Arab majority, restricting Jewish immigration. Jews are desperate to leave Europe. We are going to be massacred, including most of my family, more than 6 million people. And Britain refused to let any refugee from Europe into Palestine area. By the way, so did the US. And so did 38 countries that got together in Avian in France to try to discuss the issue of Jewish refugees. Nobody but the Dominican Republic, how interesting, was willing to take in any refugees, Jews from Europe. When I said that Britain should be at least partially blamed for the horrible outcomes of the Holocaust, that's what I meant. So now the British are completely turning back from the idea of a Jewish state as was offered only 20 years earlier. In 20 years, the changes are just amazing. For 30 years, everything happens so quickly. That's a new idea, that it will be an Arab state, and they can decide how many Jews they want to take in, how many Jews the Arabs would like to take in. All right? And even this one was rejected by the Arab, because he spoke about some Jewish presence in the land. That's the mindset, and that's the idea. Well, that will lead us now to Palestine during WW2, and not much happened in Palestine in those years. I'm going to run the title here, except for one thing. The Grand Mufti that I introduced to you, Haj Amin al-Husseini, fled from Palestine during the Arab Revolt. Great Britain was on his tail, and he took shelter in Berlin, and he was broadcasting on German radio every day, calling for the utter destruction of the Jews in the Arab countries, etc. So the British were hoping that they will have the Arab support in the war that was in vain. The Arabs officially took the German side. Now, Britain understood the Jews will never support the Nazis, right? So the Jews were allies for granted. They didn't have to appease them in any way. There's no way that the Jews will not support the British in the war against the Nazis. And indeed, 40,000 Jews from Palestine volunteered to the British Army. That would be a blessing, because these people will have the training, will have the experience, the right chain of command. When this war will be over and the state of Israel will be built, their experience is going to create the backbone of the Israeli army. So that issue of volunteering was real help later on when the War of Independence started. I do want to show you something, see how it works with the audio over there. But the only thing that the Jews try to do in Palestine is to try to take as many survivors as possible from European soil. For example, Romania was conquered by the Red Army from Nazi Germany in March of 1944. So at least let's bring Romanian Jews back home, those that survived. I was born in Romania, my family from Romania, not as many survived. Out of 600,000 Romanian Jews, maybe 100,000 survived. But they are willing to go home. Let's at least try to bring them back to Palestine/Israel against the British will. So we're going to buy some old boats. We're going to stuff them with lots of people in terrible conditions, but that's the way to save them. And guess what happened when these boats arrived to the shores of Palestine? Stopped by the British, arrested by the British, who sent them to detention camps in Cyprus. So these people just survived the concentration camps in Eastern Europe. On the way back home, they're arrested once again, and they're being sent to detention camps in Cyprus. Again, it's in Hebrew, and I try to explain what is it that you see. No volume, please. No volume. Nobody's boat that was purchased with a lot of money to try to load it with a lot of people, getting closer now to Palestine, and the airplane is flying from above, so they have to hide, so the British won't know that this is basically one of those ships that brings in clandestine immigrants, so that's why they're kind of hiding. You'll see in a minute the plane flies above. It was in terrible conditions, but again, people just survived hell, basically, and they were willing to suffer any way needed just to go back home to Palestine. And the journey will take about a week to go from the Black Sea, the harbor of Constanța in Romania, and once again, you're getting closer to the shores of Palestine, and you know that sooner or later the British Navy will show up, all right? And they're going to board your ship, usually without resistance, but sometimes, and here they come boarding the ships, arresting you. Sometimes people are injured, and they will send you back to Cyprus to be on detention camps until the state was born. All right? And I can't stop thinking that maybe some people see they are not members of my family because those that were gone, but just people coming from Romania. That was the only effort that the Jewish militia was basically doing during the war. And it's the very same time. So you fight the British on land, but you help them in Europe, because 40,000 Jews did volunteer to the British Army, and that was an experience that they got later on. You understand, all right? This is one of the heroic pages, if I may say so, of my people in the land of Israel. Well, let's move on and get closer. That's what the approach of the Arabs and the Muslims. Right, the fatwa of the Mufti that was calling for a jihad against Great Britain, and most of the Arab countries in the area only joined the effort, all right, of the Allies in 1945 when the war was almost over. Egypt suddenly decided they are part of the Allies, and so did Syria. Syria was occupied by France. France was occupied by Nazi Germany. So you don't understand that the French troops that were deployed in Syria were basically serving Nazi Germany. Okay, strange situation. Anyhow, that will lead eventually to the establishment of the State of Israel. Since the clock is ticking, I need to apologize over and over again. I need to kind of skip some of those, but again, you know what I mean by that already. Great Britain needs people. They bring Arabs from the area, and these people without any documents will be called refugees later on, and they are considered even today as part of the indigenous people of the land. After the war was over, we understood that the Arabs are a minor problem. If we are not fighting the British mandate, we'll never have our state. So the true face of the British mandatory authorities finally surfaced after the Second World War. Britain won the war, but they lost the empire. The British Empire was completely exhausted. They did not have the resources or the manpower to control Palestine. They invested 90,000 troops in Palestine. These people were needed elsewhere. So Great Britain decides to leave the area. They left in 1947-48 India, Sri Lanka or Ceylon back in the days, and Palestine. There was simply not enough manpower, not enough resources. They're going home. And Ernst Bevin, who was the Prime Minister, is making an offer to the UN, just born, replacing the League of Nations, by the way. Embracing all the documents of the League of Nations. Keep in mind, Palestine is the homeland for the Jews. Now it's part of the United Nations official agenda, as it was in the League of Nations. And since the British are going home, the UN has to deal with this hot potato called Palestine. And what they do, they send a committee over, as always. We'll send a committee, and these guys will check and see what can be done. The Arabs have the experience of their revolt crush. Maybe they'll be more flexible. The Jews just lost so many millions, maybe they will be happier to go to some negotiations, etc. And that group, UNSCOP, is coming to Palestine, and the plan is to meet with Jewish leaders, to meet with the Arab leaders. Guess who comes to the table and who refuses? So only the Jewish leadership. You see David Ben-Gurion, who was the head of the provisional government, this man here was representing the Israeli side. No negotiations. The team is touring the country. Each time they go to Arab places like Nazareth, Arab town, they're welcomed by the children screaming, throwing rocks, dirty diapers, etc. They were not welcomed by the Arab population. The Arabs understood. These guys come to speak about partition once again. They're going to advocate a Jewish state, which will never happen, and therefore we don't show any kind of kindness. We totally reject the whole plan. But this team stays in the country for a few months, and after meeting and negotiating, etc., they come to the conclusion that partition is the only possibility. Interesting discussion between Ben-Gurion and the Indian representative. The Indian says, listen, we hate the British, we just got our independence, we understand your point. But if I vote for a Jewish state, I have 300 million Muslims in India, it will lead to total civil war. And therefore, I'm sorry, I need to take the Arabs' position, although I do believe that you're right. That's politics, that's how it works. But this committee came to the conclusion they're going to present their plan to the United Nations, who is going to vote for it. I'm taking a sidetrack to teach you some Latin. I'm sure that you're very good at Latin. There is a, let's call it a law from the days of the Roman Empire, how interesting, that made its way into international law today. If you want to read it, uti possiditis juris, whatever. That says the following. When you have a country that was in the hands of a superpower, and the superpower left to hand it over to the local population, The borders of the country under the superpower are the borders of the new entity. And this is implemented in international law until this very day. So here are the borders of Palestine, all right, after Churchill took this part away from here. This was by the League of Nations / United Nations, a homeland for the Jewish people. The British are leaving, and by this juris, it's supposed to be the Jewish state, right? It worked in other places as the big empires are dismantling and colonialism is gone. They leave behind countries, states, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan. And not to have any debates, what will be the borders of a new one, that's the understanding. If I had a mandate over Lebanon, says France, and I'm leaving, what I called Lebanon is the land of Lebanon today under the Lebanese. And it was acceptable everywhere, with one exception. Anybody wants to guess which one? Thank you. Because by this law, the land of the British mandate that was promised to the Jews is indeed the Jewish land. Nevertheless, the UN has another suggestion. They speak about partition. We're going to take this Palestine, we're going to divide it into two. There will be a homeland for the Jews, a homeland for the Arabs. Hallelujah, end of problem. Everybody gets something. It sounds so reasonable, and for that reason, it will never work. Keep in mind, the Middle East is not operating on logic and common sense. It's not. It never did. Now, for the Western mindset, that's mind-blowing. Because in your culture, I believe in mine too, we have an issue, we are discussing it, we are negotiating it. You get some, you win some, you lose some. We'll find a solution because it makes sense. It's for the best of everybody. That kind of logic doesn't work in the Middle East. When logic comes at our direction, it stops in Cyprus, it never makes it all the way to the Middle East. And this is something which is hard for me to share with people like you, because it's not the way that you think. It's not the way things are done in the Western civilization. So we are an island. We sometimes call ourselves proudly and arrogantly a villa in the jungle maybe, but it's our perspective of a Western mindset and Western thinking in the very heart of the Muslim world that simply has a different mindset and a different, it's a misunderstanding. We don't speak the same language. We don't think the same. So here's a new suggestion, and once again, most of the land will be now allocated to the Jewish people. Yes, there were some warm sympathies to the Jews as a result of the Holocaust. The world was more generous, and so was the UN, I'll be quick to admit. But most of the land, this is a desert where nobody lives in. Today they do. This is the good land. So that's the plan. And they take it to the table, so to speak, of the United Nations. Needless to say, who was for it and who was against it. And immediately you hear statements like, the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood. If there will be a Jewish state, then the Arab people, 1 million Jews live in Arab countries, will take them too. In other words, will kill them, will murder them if there will be a Jewish state. Nevertheless, they bring it to the negotiation table. The United Nations is voting for what will be called the partition plan. It was the 29th of November 1947, and by that resolution, 2 countries are born. One for the Jews and one for the Arabs. Listen to this recording because I think it's fascinating. In a minute. If I can have the volume, please.
Danger. Now. Soviet Union. Yes. United Kingdom. Abstain. The United States. Yes. Yugoslavia. Abstain.
Resolution of the DUC Committee for Palestine was adopted by 37 votes, 13 against, 10 abstained.
Hallelujah. There was a Jewish state and there was an Arab state. Celebrations in the streets of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. The war started the following day. Because once that came into effect, the Arabs carried out the threat that there would not be a Jewish state, and the local Arabs, let's call them Palestinians just for the sake of convenience, because the term is not used yet. Nobody is calling the local Arabs Palestinians. That term was not even born yet, speaking about a national entity. A day after that, the war begins. The war was a war on the roads, so to speak. Israeli vehicles are being attacked by the Arab militias, and the Arab armies around Israel are waiting patiently for the British mandate to come to an end. The British troops are still in Palestine, but knowing that they are leaving, they minimize their intervention, they don't take sides, so to speak. But when an Iraqi force invaded into Palestine to destroy a Jewish community, the British are totally ignoring it. So Great Britain wasn't very fair in the way that they kept their presence in the country. This will be step one of the war, because the British are still there. After the British mandate came to an end, 7 Arab armies will invade the young state's territory. The chances to survive are close to zero. But it was clear for the Jewish leadership that by the time the proclamation of independence, after the British mandate comes to an end, if we do not destroy the local Arab militias, we cannot confront them. And the Arab armies, at the same time, we will be destroyed. And therefore, phase number 1 of the war, when the British are still in the country, is to deal with the local militias. All right, let's call them Palestinians, just for the sake of convenience. Here at the balance of powers, give or take, we do speak about the majority of Arabs in the land, but these people did not have any leadership, they did not have any institutions, and the motivation was close to zero. As you see sometimes reports from Arab leaders, how can we recruit the people to fight for a nation when they do not understand the concept of being one? So we had an advantage, so to speak, because the Jewish side, although it was outnumbered, people had the experience fighting for the British only a few years earlier, a clear chain of command, well-established institutions. It was a state in the making, ready for the challenge, especially after the Holocaust. If we miss this chance, we may have to wait for 2,000 years once again. So that was the opening stage. But the big advantage for the Arabs was that they controlled the roads. Jerusalem, for example, a very isolated city. One road only leads to Jerusalem, easy to block. The city was starving almost to death because we did not have enough manpower to break through that blockade. We'll get to that in just a minute, speaking of refugees, just to give you a short intro. And once again, minimum volume, please. Less, no volume. Okay. What I speak basically about, try to break through the blockade of the Arab militias by having those convoys. And the vehicles were loaded with food and had some guards as well. The British couldn't care less about what was going on. They would check the trucks before they started moving to see they don't carry any ammunition, any means of war, just food, to break through the blockade of the Arabs and make their way up to Jerusalem. By the way, the winter of 1948 was the most freezing winter in Israel ever. That added to the problem. The city was about to surrender. Jerusalem was starving to death as a result of that blockade of the militias, and the only way that we could respond was to have those convoys and try to break through that blockade time after time to bring food to the city. These are the Arab militias, the Arab irregulars, controlling the mountains overlooking the one road that went to Jerusalem. That's why it was so easy for them to try to block that road. That was the beginning of it. In Jerusalem, in the city, checkpoints everywhere of Arabs and of Jews and of the British as well. Things were quite intense in the first part of the war. That's what I meant earlier. An Arab activist that speaks about try to get people together as a nation when they do not understand the idea of fighting for a nation. So phase number 1, as I said, fighting for the roads, try to break through that blockade, because later on they will speak about ethnic cleansing, that the Jewish state was ethnically cleansing hundreds of thousands of Arabs, loaded them on trucks and sending them away. That's a lie. However, in some places, we had to. 4 villages were overlooking the main road to Jerusalem. And each time our convoys went through, they would come back and block the road. In order to save Jerusalem, these villages had to be expelled. So yes, in few places, we brought trucks, we loaded them with the locals, and we sent them away. Away means only 5 miles away. That's it. Not to a foreign country, not to a foreign century. It wasn't time travel. We just have to have a corridor that we can defend so the food for Jerusalem flows without interruption. All right, so ethnic cleansing, I'm not sure that will be the term here. But yes, about 80% of people that will be called refugees left voluntarily. The rest of them, we encourage them to leave. Guess what? It happens in every war. Any idea how many refugees were wandering the roads in Europe only 3 years earlier? How about 50 million? You know how many Germans had to leave Czechoslovakia and just to go back home? About 8 million. Many died along the way. Polacks, Croats. That's what happens in war. So there was no ethnic cleansing. In some places, we had to expel people, yes, as they did, like Jerusalem. Jerusalem ended up, the old city, in Jordanian hands. Guess what happened to the Jewish quarter in Jerusalem? People were loaded on trucks and sent away to West Jerusalem. Isn't that ethnic cleansing? It's a very unpleasant outcome of every war, unfortunately. I do want to show you this one as well. Speaking about the road to Jerusalem, today it's a beautiful 3-lane highway that you're flying along, but you do see how narrow it is, how easy it is to block. Just roll some boulders from the hillsides, and the city doesn't get any food. And there's be those convoys, right, carrying all the stuff to Jerusalem, and of course a lot of jubilee and happiness when these convoys made it into the city. Winter of 1948, see the snow on the ground. As we said, food was very short in supply. There was no water, by the way. What saved the city, interesting, in 1948, were the biblical water systems. The Israelites, the Judeans, were digging cisterns to collect rainwater 3,000 years ago. It's still working until this very day. The water finds its way to fill up those cisterns. What saved Jerusalem in 1948 were the biblical water systems. Interesting when it comes to water. All right, so food, again, I do want to go through this one. So, as I said, although the British were still in the country, in some places, they were not really behaving, how shall we say that, fairly, all right, when it comes to who we're going to support. It's supposed to be neutral, but that very rarely happened. I do want to run this one through with your permission, just the old city of Jerusalem. It was the Jordanian Legion, all right, the Jordanian Legion was the army of Transjordan. Great Britain let them invade into their territory in Palestine, but the British are still in the land. The mandate still goes on. Foreign forces were not supposed to be present in mandatory Palestine. The Iraqis were, and the Jordanians were. The locals had very little to defend themselves with. And after surrendering, here you see ethnic cleansing. Jaffa Gate in Jerusalem, you've been there. I'm sorry, Zion Gate. Some of you have been there, know the place. 3,000 people were simply taking some little that they left with them, leaving behind all the casualties that were buried later on Mount of Olives, and this is ethnic cleansing. All right? Unfortunately, it happens in every war, a very unpleasant outcome of every war. Well, the British mandate came to an end officially in the 14th of May 1948. It was a Friday. Great Britain is leaving the air after 30 years of mandate, and the very same minutes that the British last High Commissioner, Ellen Cunningham, is leaving the port of Haifa, David Ben-Gurion is proclaiming the Jewish state in Tel Aviv. Keep in mind, 2 states. One for the Jews, one for the Arabs. I will ask you later on how come there was no Palestine today. Because you do know, state of Israel exists. What about Palestine? The United Nations said very clearly that Palestine for the Arabs, Israel for the Jews, all right? You do know there is no place called Palestine. The Palestinian state was never born. The question is, why not? If you don't know your history, and I would ask you the question, you'd have an answer for it. Because you, the Jews, conquered the land, huh? Big mistake. Huge mistake. The land that was allocated to the Palestinians ended up in Arab hands, Jordan and Egypt. They refused to give the land over for them to build a state, not Israel. We'll get to that in a few minutes. So a new phase and a new chapter in the story. And since it's obvious that Great Britain is leaving, read the approach, all right, of the Arab leaders, of the Arab nations. How do they plan? What is their plan for the Jewish state that was just born? And this is just one of hundreds of those statements, all right? And this is not a nobody. We speak about a very important individual. That was the plan. If the Jews will ever dare to proclaim their statehood, then the mighty Arab armies are going to invade the Jewish state and they're going to kill all of them, throw them into the ocean. That's the plan, by the way, until this very day. Listen, don't listen to me, listen to them. They keep delivering the message over and over again. This is not propaganda. That's the plan. It was indeed the 14th of May, Friday afternoon. Ellen Cunningham, the last High Commissioner, is boarding the boat in the Haifa harbor. The very same time, 4 p.m., before Shabbat begins. Interesting, the Sabbath, of course, is very important, and we did not know exactly when the British are going to officially proclaim their departure. Problem was, if this was about an hour too late and the Sabbath had started, then some of the people that signed the Proclamation of Independence will not be attending because they would not do it on Shabbat. On Shabbat, you don't write, you don't go anywhere, you stay home. And without the signature of a majority, you cannot proclaim the state. I know it sounds like something ridiculous, but people that do care about keeping the Jewish way of life will find it very important. So until the last minute, we did not know. Are we going to proclaim the state or wait until Sunday? Okay? Fortunately, they left early enough. And therefore, they proclaimed the state. That was the beginning of it. And David Ben-Gurion over there, I'll show you a short film in just a minute. Let's bring the British mandate to conclusion. By the way, please read these 2 paragraphs of Israel's Proclamation of Independence. We don't have a constitution. This is something like a constitution. That's how Israel wants to present itself to the whole world. And is this big enough for you to read? Basically, we want peace in the area. Everybody's invited in. Arabs will be equal to Jews. Stop this war thing. It's going to be a blessing to everybody. These are the 2 opening paragraphs in our Proclamation of Independence. I'll encourage you to Google when you go back home and you read the charter of the PLO and then read the charter of Hamas. It will just give an idea, all right, about how they want to present themselves, and compare it with this, and I think that you'll understand the whole difference. British mandate, as we said, a lot of changes over the years, all of them in favor of the Arabs. We did speak about British diplomacy and what was the real intent. Frustrating, but even during that, the Jews were able to purchase more land, bring in more people, because Britain had a policy, but the world that gave Britain the mandate was always watching to see when the British are violating that, and every now and then Britain had to be more flexible and open the gates and take more Jews in. So from the Jewish perspective, more land was purchased, more people came in, but that was not with British assistance. It was against the British policy. I do want to point to this, and I'm saying that because those of you that may be familiar with some debates, and pro-Arabs are taking their argument and pro-Jews take their argument, usually it will be the following. The population in Palestine increased, the Arab one, not because of immigration. We speak about locals. It wasn't foreigners. And how come? Well, the British invested in hospitals and great health care. And that's why the population rose. These are indigenous Palestinians. They're not immigrants. Let me tell you what. Was the British mandate over Jordan and French mandate over Syria and Lebanon. It didn't happen there. Why not? Well, I will say it was indeed the Jewish factor that encouraged people to come. Look at Egypt. The most fast-growing Arab country in the world back then increased between these two in 105%, while the locals in Palestine increased in close to 300%. That should be it if it was natural and just by biology. We speak about illegal immigrants that infiltrated into the country, taking full advantage of new prosperity created by Jewish money enterprise. So this is one of the main arguments. The population grew of the Arabs, not because of illegal immigration. It grew because of Great Britain doing such a great job in improving living conditions. That's why nonsense. All right, the documents are there, easy to follow and easy to verify. So now we have this and the white paper of MacDonald. We spoke about that as well. In other words, we are going back now to the War of Independence. But this is important, all right? The same man who wrote the book that said that Balfour was wrong, all right, and Britain is no longer in favor of the Jewish state, also wrote this, okay? So this is important to read those documents. Bear with me for another 15 minutes. We'll bring that session to an end. And all right, once again, I need to run some of it through. I'll leave it there for a few seconds so you can read some of it. This is to answer the argument that the Jews came and stole land from poor peasants. We just showed up one day, we killed them, and we stole their land, all right? Everything is documented. Land was purchased from churches, by the way. Keep in mind, churches started coming about a century earlier. They bought some real estate hoping to attract Christians to come. And when people did not come, you have a huge piece of land that nobody's cultivating. Hey, the Jews are willing to pay money for it. All right? So everything was done legally. And not by killing anybody, and not by expelling anybody. Land was purchased in astronomical prices, and only 7% of the land of Palestine was indeed in Jewish hands. And once again, some of the data there about the percentage of land that was purchased, most of it belonged to absentee Arab landlords who fled as the tension started. These people were not connected to the land. They had no roots in the land. They came as visitors back home to Lebanon, Afghanistan, Egypt. They owned the land. So the land was purchased from them. Even today, we have a lot of absentees land which is officially owned by the state of Israel. It's not for sale. The state is managing it somehow because who knows, maybe once in the future we'll find a solution. And these people have some rights in the land as well. So this is just to bring everything to conclusion, speaking about the 30 years of the British mandate over Palestine. It's 14th of May, David Ben-Gurion comes to proclaim the state in Tel Aviv. And they are waiting to hear from Haifa if the British High Commissioner left already before they officially start the ceremony. Can we have the volume, please? It's in Hebrew, but... Like every nation that has the right for self-determination in its old state, that's why we open the gates of a country to every Jewish man that wants to come back home. So it can be one nation once again among the nations. Therefore, we got together the members of the provisional government. The day of the termination of the British mandates in Israel. And from a natural demand and right for the land. And based on the declaration of the United Nations, we declare by this the founding of a Jewish state, land of Israel, which is the state of Israel. I've seen that hundreds of times, still brings tears in your eyes every now and then. So that was a proclamation, and since the British are out, that opens the way to the Arab armies to invade the Jewish state. Keep in mind, as long as the state was not proclaimed yet officially, the Arab armies are waiting on the borders. Now the Brits are out, and a full-scale invasion of 7 armies into Israel. Let me just show you this, of course, celebrations in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem when the state was born. At the very same time, the war begins. Volume, please.
The 3 women are all Jews who need or reach to come here to escape from hatred, contempt and oppression.
בשלוש שנות המאבק שקדמו להקמת המדינה, חתרו לחופי הארץ כ-70,000 מעפילים. את רובם תפס הצי הבריטי.
All right, we spoke about this clandestine immigration. I do want to take a side track, which is the main track, basically speak about refugees. So the war is not the main thing here. The war started, the war was over, the Jewish state prevailed, Arab armies were defeated, there's no Palestinian state, we'll get to that in just a minute. But the refugees issue is a cardinal issue to understand. Because until this very day, this is a real human tragedy, I will have to say. And this is a tragedy that could have been solved years and years and years back in the time. Nobody wants to solve the refugee problem, which makes it really, I would say, very annoying, because only a few years earlier, 1945, Europe was flooded by tens of millions of refugees. They are no longer refugees. Within years, Each one find a new home, got a new citizenship, build a family, find a job. End of problem. The only refugee issue, which is very much on the table, even today, almost 80 years later, is the issue of Palestinian refugees. Does it have to be like that? No. Nobody wants to solve the problem. And therefore, the refugees are used as a weapon against Israel. And they are miserable. It's a fifth generation of refugees, by the way, the only refugees in the world that can inherit their position to their children of the Palestinian refugee. This is not a title that stays in the family. It's not hereditary, with one exception, the Palestinians. They can inherit that to the fifth generation. Why? I have no answers for you, except for the obvious one. Because the Jews are on the other side. Do you know that somebody that has a new life, you know the name Bella Hadid and Gigi Hadid, top models, technically, they're refugees. The father, forgot his name, I'm sorry, still has a refugee card. He's an American citizen, he's a multimillionaire. Technically, he's still entitled to have a bag of rice and a bag of flour because he is a refugee. Give me another example in world history that such a situation exists. Because once you have a new citizenship, that will officially eliminate your refugee status. A refugee is a man with no country and no citizenship. Everywhere, always, with one exception, Palestinian refugees. You have to be sarcastic here to understand how cynically the world is using the misery of close to 5 or 6 million people. These people deserve lives. They deserve future and hope. Not because of Israel. The Arab world doesn't want to solve the refugee issue. It's a great tool. It's a great weapon against Israel. Let me show you this. All right? Why do you become a refugee? Why would anybody leave his home? Willingly? You should be in danger of some kind. You should think that maybe your life is not safe for your property and you leave. Sometimes you see an invading army and you go. In the case of the Palestinians, what they thought was that the Jews are going to treat them like Muslims used to treat the Jews for centuries upon centuries as dhimmis. They did not understand why a conquering army will not treat them as they would treat others, as Islam always did. Just like the Muslims treated Jews as dhimmis, they were positive. Now the Jews are victorious, they're going to treat us the same way we treated them. Most of them left before the war even started. And we speak about 700,000 to 800,000 people that left the country. By today, they believe to be about 5 million. They never allowed to have a census. Nobody ever counted, they don't know. So if you can manipulate the numbers, you can inflate the numbers, you get more money from the UN. They always report birth cases, they never report death cases. Which means more money from the UN, you're paying for it. Because the biggest donor to UNRWA, which is the Refugee Association, is America. You are paying for it for years, billions of dollars, which is just a waste of money. These people could get lives and homes and jobs and families and be prosperous. The Arab world won't let them. You want them to be refugees because it's a great weapon, a great tool. Only about a year ago, one of the Hamas leaders in Gaza was asked, how come you dug all these tunnels for you to take shelter? What about the people? The refugees, they are the UN problem. Hamas today, freedom fighters, fighting for the people, all right? And you hear some frustration in my voice. The UN that wanted to do this in most cases had an Article 11 in the resolution 1949 to try to solve the problem. All refugees should be allowed, permitted to go back to their homes if they are willing to live peacefully with their neighbors. Israel said, you know what, let's negotiate. Oh no. If you negotiate with Israel, you're recognizing Israel. We are not recognizing Israel. So what's the alternative? No negotiations, no recognition, and people live in shameful conditions for nearly 80 years now. So the refugees are not just refugees. we speak about a problem which is kept alive for a purpose. Look at the Arab League. The Arab League, all right? These refugees that were invited by the host countries enjoy zero rights. You want to speak about apartheid? That's apartheid. Not in Israel. In Israel, Arabs are Israelis, just like anybody else. Members in the Knesset, electing, voting, judges in the Supreme Court. Israeli Arabs are Israelis. Those who fled to neighboring countries are treated like dogs. Zero rights in their own families, their own countries, their own brothers and sisters that invited them to come and take shelter because the Arab armies are coming. We're going to throw the Jews to the ocean. You may be in danger. Come to our country just for the time being, and then you go back and take their homes because we're going to kick their butts. Forgive me for the, excuse my French, as they say, right? Not happening. These refugees left their homes before the war even started. Because number one, the leadership fled. And if there's no leadership, who is going to tell you what to do? Who are you going to follow? UNRWA, everybody knows the name, the United Nations Relief and Welfare Agency. The UN had another body that dealt with refugees around the world. For some reason, the Palestinians needed their own separated body. The other one dealt with more than 17 million refugees very successfully. UNRWA did not rehabilitate one, just one Palestinian since 1949. Not even one. They don't want to. It's a moneymaker. If the world is willing to pay, we're making money out of these refugees. You know that most of the workers of UNRWA in Gaza are refugees. So how can you trust the figures you hear from Hamas and Gaza about the toll of death casualties when the people giving the figures are not some neutral people? These are UNRWA employees who are Palestinians. This is the biggest employer in the Palestinian territories. 60% of unemployment. UNRWA provides jobs, so I give it up. Life is good. They can suffer. We're making money out of it. I'm not being sarcastic. That's the case. UNRWA is the problem, not a solution. So the world is very happy with another agency, and UNRWA was specially created for the Palestinians, and they had their own ideas. Who is called a refugee? Who is a refugee? According to UNRWA, anybody who lived in Palestine between 1946 to 1948 will believe to be a genuine Palestinian, part of the indigenous people. These people came in as illegal workers or brought in by the British. They never had documents or Israeli citizenship. But a refugee is somebody who lost his citizenship and fled to another country and doesn't have one. They never had one in Palestine either. So I call them refugee. Well, because the Jews are on the other side. And we're going to use them as a weapon. And I'm telling you, these people are falling between the cracks and they're really miserable. The problem could have been solved years and years ago. Nobody wants to solve the problem. Refugee is a good thing. And since you never had a census, you have no idea how many are there. So you can always manipulate the numbers, you're making more money. The world begins to understand that UNRWA is a problem. And many donor countries, including America, are no longer giving money to UNRWA. Maybe that will change the situation. If you call yourself a refugee agency, that's a problem. In a way, you're perpetuating the refugee status instead of solving it. Find another name, all right? The rehabilitation group or whatever. The only refugees in the world that still maintain their position 80 years after the effect are the Palestinians. Not in Korea, and not in Europe, and not in Africa, just the Palestinians. I'm sorry for being a little emotional about that, but you do understand that we're speaking about something very personal that affects our lives as well. So speaking about refugees, it's a very kind of a touchy issue that we need to understand. I do want just to show you some of the slides here with your permission. And again, just leave that behind. And then we'll have some time to break. All right, confession of the Syrian Prime Minister. Take a minute to read that, all right? Who created the refugee problem? Sometimes you have honest people on the Arab side as well, all right? So what happened basically was, leave your homes, come and take shelter in our country, will come to deal with the Jews, then you go back home. Unfortunately, the Jews won the war. You're not going back home. It never happened in any place in world history that refugees will go back home, especially living peacefully, all right, with your neighbors. It just doesn't happen. A research institution, an Arab one in Beirut, look at their conclusion. All right? Most of the people called refugees will not qualify to be called refugees by international standards. It's an exception made for the Palestinians. Why? Because of anti-Semitism, I say it loud and clear. We want to use them as a weapon against the Jewish state. It doesn't have to be like that. These guys are a tool. And they really live a very shameful way of life in most cases. I also want to show you some of the, how shall we say, some of the approaches or the views of even the leaders of UNRWA, all right? Not this one, but please read the one at the bottom, John Glad. John Glad, the British, was the commander of the Judean Legion. That was his impression. And then you read the UNRWA personnel, and once again apologizing, and I want to show you especially, all right, read both of them. You see, UNRWA was so generous in giving out food coupons and giving out food that the refugee was much better off than the local population. So if you live in a town in Lebanon, and those people come from Palestine, and the UN builds a camp to them, and they get food, and they live better than I do, I want to be a refugee as well. And since there were no IDs, nobody took any notes, suddenly thousands of locals reported at the office of UNRWA asking to be recognized as refugees. They will live better off as refugees than what their own country could provide them with. How shameful is this? And since nobody was taking notes about anything, that was the end of it. They gave out food packages, and before not too long, we'll speak about hundreds of thousands of refugees who are not Palestinians, never lived in Palestine, but for the whole world, these are the indigenous people of the land. Now you go and figure, all right, who are these people, and who has the right to be a refugee and live out of welfare, and who just, had a need, so decided to go and find that refugee status. And the last one, promise. Once again, the idea about UNRWA and how UNRWA operates. Is it too early for lunch, Pastor? Okay, I'm trying to time. I can go on and on and on, but makes clear? Does it make any sense to you? All right? We have lots of food. People showed up, they look poor. We give them food. And then we give them a little ticket. And they will be refugees forever. So what's your motivation to stop being one? Why will you ever try to find a job, get a decent education, when you're making better life being a refugee than what your country can provide to you? It's sad. It's sad that to have the status of refugee is better than what you can get in your own native country. But that's a story. And to make it more intriguing, we'll leave that for the next session with your permission. And I'm running all this one through. What about this? Were there Jewish refugees? Oh yeah, and quite a lot. But we'll leave that for the next session. All right?
She needs about 15 minutes.
All right, let's speak about Jewish refugees then. No? Hey, it's fine. We can go on and on and on. The 6 sessions I'm giving here, and thank you, Pastor, for the opportunity, is not the full version of it. All right, usually it's an 8-session seminar, so that's why I have to skip some of the slides, but hey, this is an opportunity to be able to expand and to... Let's speak about Jewish refugees. Well, in Arab countries, about 1 million Jews live. By the way, how many refugees the Palestinians had leaving Israel? Hard to tell. Impossible to know. And by the way, if you came from Egypt in 1946, and now you want to go back home. You get on the train, and you simply go back home. That's where you came from. But once you get to the Egyptian border, the Egyptians will stop their train, will take you off the train. They don't want you back home, and they'll send you to live in a new camp. The camp is called Gaza Strip. Most of the people in Gaza today will be refugees that fled from Israel, that came in as workers with no documents. On the way back home, they were stopped by the Egyptian authorities, so they won't flood Egypt once again and send them to populate the Gaza area. By the way, Egypt today will not let a single Palestinian cross the border to take shelter in Egypt, not even one. And Gaza has a border with Egypt. The world only cares about us sending in food. What about the Egyptians? Your brothers and sisters, you have a border. Open the borders. Let them go and take shelter. Provide medical care. Do something for them. Oh, no. Just Israel has to take care about the Palestinians. Not our problem. So the whole Gaza Strip was created by the Egyptians, stopping the influx of Egyptians on the way back home after Israel was born. Not to go back to flood Egypt. You stay here. Amazing how it works, and these facts most people don't know. So we do have also about 1 million Jews that live in Arab countries. It was very clear from the beginning what will happen to them. All right, so if Israel will dare to be proclaimed a state, that's what we are going to do. All right, the Jews in Arab countries are going to be in real danger. You speak about ethnic cleansing, that's the essence of ethnic cleansing. Here are the numbers. In 1948, in Iraq, 130,000 Jews. Later on, almost none. In Egypt, almost none. These people were in danger, especially when rumors were coming from the front line that the Jewish army is defeating Muslims. Do you understand how humiliating that is? The mighty armies of Islam are defeated by these nobodies, by our slaves, the sons of the pigs and the apes. The hatred was taken immediately on the Jewish communities. People had to run for their lives. In some places, it was too late. People were massacred by the thousands. That's ethnic cleansing. You didn't find it in Israel. You find it in the Arab countries. So today, there are very few people, Jews, that live in Arab countries. In the late 40s, early 50s, we speak about close to 800,000 people. Many went to America as well, Australia, Canada, and about half of them ended up in Israel, leaving behind all their property, lots of property. Estimate of more than $100 billion in value. Israel is preparing now a lawsuit. Whenever we'll settle the issue with the Arab world, sooner or later, and they will speak about compensation for the poor refugees, we'll say, okay, let's do the math. The poor refugees left behind $3.9 billion value in asset. The Jewish ones left behind more than $100 billion. You want to do the math? Or just leave us alone? But they are preparing all the data, all the information, and it will be on the table. Because when was the last time you heard about Jewish refugees? Never. Never ever. Why not? Because only the Arabs have the right to be called refugees. Speaking about refugees, these are refugees. Jews lived in Iraq from the days of Babylon. Jews lived in Iraq from the days of Nehemiah, Ezekiel, ongoing, thriving Jewish communities. It all came to an end about 60 years ago. Long before Islam was born, long before Iraq was born. The Jews are the indigenous people of Iraq and Egypt, not the Iraqis of today. They were sent on trucks, airplanes, some of them, and they were gone. So these are the Jewish refugees. They don't have the status because those that came to Israel became Israelis. They have the citizenship. They are our society. My family came from Romania, in a way, refugees as well. We're no longer refugees, we came back home. And that's a big difference. But speaking about, just about fairness, refugees, what about Jewish refugees? Why the whole world is obsessed with Palestinian refugees? Nobody says a word about Jewish refugees? Because we are not the victims anymore. People make a whole career by victimizing themselves. Whining, complaining, crying all the time. That's not the Jewish way, I'm sorry. But just for the record, 1 million Jews, all right, will be qualified to be called refugees. Those Jews that were ethnically cleansed from the Arab countries in the area. I do like this little kind of math to do here with you, and just work with me for a minute. Yeah, if I forget this one, the property, etc. People speak about the ownership of land. Let's see if we can follow that together, okay? Jewish people own land in Arab countries, okay? You want to compensate people for property. Well, there are about 7 million square kilometers and population of 58 million in the Arab country the Jews came from. Let's take the 7 million divided to per capita. How much land every individual has? Okay, about 860,000 Jews live there. Each one has, by simple formula, all right, about what? 0.2 or 12 square kilometers. If you multiply that with the number of Jews that left, then the Jewish property is 102,000 square kilometers. All right, how big is the state of Israel? We want to be 10 times bigger. Is it fair? Yes or no? You complain about property, exchanging people. What about exchanging property as well? So your problem is with this tiny little Jewish home, when Jews owned 5 times more land in the area to begin with. If you want to speak about property and you want to calculate how much each one has, let's use this formula. Which means we need to conquer another 80,000 square kilometers. How about that, huh? Just to have the number or the amount of land the Jews deserve. If you speak about ownership of land and who stole land from who, in the Arab countries, Jewish land was stolen. 100,000 square kilometers of Jewish property was stolen by the locals. Was anybody ever mentioning that part of the story? Of course not. Well, that's why I'm here. Thank you, Pastor. To be able to just to share that or these thoughts with you. Some will say, listen, this is just semantics and this is manipulation. I agree. It's not going to happen. But why not bring that to the equation as well if we speak about who owns what and how much land was taken and how many refugees and how many casualties? Let's take all the information and then we'll have a fair figure. Did I give enough time for preparation? I can go on. Okay.